leaking top insider stock trades every day until they stop us. We had about 115 new insider trades come in. Most of them are going to be totally useless. It's our job to find those unscheduled and abnormal ones that could lead to outperformance. Taking a look at the daily data here, a pretty normal day, at least of recently, well below the percent of trades that are buys on average, which we've been now for quite a while. Again, over the quarter, we're going to come down well below the number as well. Not a huge concern. What we really like to see, it's a much higher signal when a bunch of insiders are buying, or a much larger percent of insiders are buying. Not as strong of a signal when not as many are buying. However, it is certainly a little bit of a more bearish signal. We're also going to start to see, as you can see overall, the number of trades starting to come down a little bit, which we'll see a lower number as we go into earnings season. And we also do expect, as we go into earnings season, which is still a few weeks away, but insiders are going to start entering blackout periods, not be able to make discretionary buys and sells. So it's mostly going to be pre-planned 10b5-1 sales, or some 10% owners buying the stock, or directors buying the stock, or that kind of thing. However, when you do start to see stock buys during right before earnings, it's certainly more notable, even though really they shouldn't be doing that. Let's go take a look at CEOWatcher.com. I actually want to start with Lumen Technologies, just because yesterday they announced a business update basically on the expansion of their fiber optic network. They're expanding very quickly, and we had seen, we highlighted both of these insider purchases we had actually highlighted because they're both very interesting, but especially the one by Kathleen Johnson back at the beginning of August, buying the stock down here, $500,000 of the stock. As you can see, Lumen accelerates multi-billion-dollar network expansion to meet soaring AI demand is why it went up 12%, or now up 60% since this purchase, which was notable because it's the CEO buying $500,000 of the stock. Not her largest purchase ever, but if you look back historically, her two previous purchases were very, very well timed. You had one at the end of 2023. Over the next year, obviously the stock was up, I don't know, a bajillion percent roughly, averaging 340% one-year returns, 200% 6-month, 53-month, 12 1-month. And so this 3-month returns at 53%, already up over 50% since this purchase, up 63%. So, one of those examples for, as we mentioned, one of the highest signal things here is the history of success. Insiders with good returns and win rates on previous trades tend to correlate with good returns going forward. It makes sense, and we had it here with Lumen Technologies. So let's go see if we can find anything interesting today. We'll go look at the most recent filings we have in. We'll look at the trade type, start with purchases, sort by transaction value, and we'll go take a look here. So not very many purchases obviously came in. As I mentioned, it's going to start slowing down, and there just hasn't been very many purchases, frankly. Starting at the top here, we've got Netscope. These are all you can see they're the same exact amounts here. So these are all actually the same purchase, which looks like Iconic Strategic Partners is buying the stock. We can also see, since there's no history here, this was an IPO, and so they announced the closing of initial public offering. So just buying after the IPO, probably some prearranged agreements, not going to be very interesting there. We can look at WaterBridge here. Looks like this could be very interesting. $6 million and $1.5 million purchases. Very good returns for this James Crane guy. So let's go take a look. Historically, looks like, so this is going to put a little damper on the returns because it looks like his only previous history of returns is back in COVID. And, obviously it is notable when an insider bought during COVID because it means they took advantage of it, but it's definitely going to expand their returns probably a little more, or exacerbate their returns, maybe is a better word, a little more than probably what could be expected, especially considering those are their only previous purchases. We can also see that this is what do we have here? An underwriter's option to purchase additional shares. So looks like part of some sort of purchase agreement going on here. They don't actually mention, normally they would mention that in the responses here, but looks like a director. So some sort of underwriters offering. They just had an IPO. Again, these immediate post IPOs, there's normally some sort of deals in place or something. Not much for us to do there. So kind of knocks off all of those. So this one is actually a very interesting purchase here. Cassava Sciences. This company, you'll remember, got crushed after terrible trial results earlier this year. And it was really popular because Martin Shkreli shorted it kind of up here at the top and said, hey, this stock's going to fall, and was correct. Now, this is the first purchase since that massive fall. It's also by the CEO, as we'll be able to see here. It's by the CEO. Good history of returns, at least it looks like, quickly looking through them. Maybe not the best. Maybe as we get a little longer term, not the best. And you'll notice the returns don't actually go up. So it's most of the returns happen in the first 3 months, and then it's actually pretty flat on average after that. So we can look historically to see when he was buying, and it looks like, so some decent, not so good of timing here, maybe okay timing, pretty good short-term timing back here, pretty good short-term timing here, pretty good short-term timing here. So overall, I'd say this insider has a pretty good track record of timing, at least in the short term. Obviously now with the stock down down like 90% in the last year, none of the long-term returns are going to be very good. So I do think it's notable when we see the insider buying the stock there. And then we can even click into, let's see if they tell us they got a new chief medical officer here. So this is also what kind of would make it a little interesting. They report positive preclinical study evaluating simuflam, whatever, for epilepsy. So now you've got promising preclinical data. I believe in one of these they'll tell us when the trial's going to start, which frankly we're not even close to. I feel like maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here in that the trials, in the first half, we intend to initiate a proof of concept study in the first half of 2026. So it's going to start the study. It's clearly good news. Clearly good news, but the real pump or dump will happen, after this, when this trial result comes out. However, as we've seen before with the ramp up into some of these trial results, you can get a nice little ramp as good results come out and people get more and more bullish on the product. But with all biotech and pharma stuff, it always comes down to those clinical trials. So the only thing, this for me would have been like a clear buy. I love getting involved in biotechs that have some positive news coming out and an insider buying. Just keep the position small because they can obviously blow up in your face. But the thing keeping me away from this now is that I think the stock is up like 1,000,000,000,000%. Yeah, stock's already up 20% because of that. It opened up at 270, so it opened at 270. What was he buying it at? He was buying it at 213 to 225. So it's already up 20% since he purchased it, which is his average return almost already. So because of that, it kind of takes away the purchasing there for my opinion. So doesn't make it interesting, but and that's also just kind of because this was already such a popular company. Cassava Sciences was like back here, it was so popular that now you have a lot of people paying attention to it. So when you see the insider buy come in, it kind of juices the stock. Obviously still, if this, this could be still a good reason for you to go look into maybe this simuflam and look at this preclinical study and start to maybe come up with your own opinion, because obviously long term, if this trials go well for this, the stock's going to go up, multiples from here, and this 20% jump won't mean anything. But solely based on the insider purchase, and the fact that we're still, it's not even going to start the trials till next year, it kind of knocks it off the list for me. Moving on, now here we've got another one that I think is very interesting. Archrock, we've got a director, I believe, buying the stock here. Made a couple purchases. This director made both these purchases, $480,000. No history of purchases, so we won't see him. He's never bought the stock before. Stock's had a pretty good run, obviously, 20% the last year, 115% in the last couple years. We go look at no other insider buying. Obviously, a little bit of a negative when you start to see some insiders selling here, so we can take a quick look to see maybe why these insiders are selling. We've got a $235,000 sale by a senior vice president, which you never like to see. Let's see if there's any note here. No note going on. So obviously, with the stock up a bit, wouldn't love to see that. And then we also have another one by Jason Ingersoll back here. Another sale, another senior vice president selling the stock. $1 million sale this time. We can take a look here. This transaction was executed in multiple trades, so no real good explanation for those trades either. So to me, those two certainly, put a little damper on this insider trade. One more up here. But seeing this insider, make two straight trades for his first ever trades is also interesting. We'll also notice like the guy that sold right here has not timed his sales historically well, which we can look. If we just click into it, we'll notice it looks like he's only sold once before back at the end of 2020, and the stock obviously kept going up after that. So not a particularly good track record of selling for him. The other guy that sold over here, this Jason Ingersoll, has a slightly better track record of sales. Let's see if we can click in and see what it's looking like here. Looks like he's also only sold once before, all the way back in 2018. And the stock definitely dipped some, down in $7 to $6 over the next year or something. And it looks like he bought the COVID dip. So a little bit better of a track record. However, the reason I still find these trades interesting is if we go look at some of the data on Archrock here. So one, we can see it looks like, we're just jumped above the 200-day moving average, which obviously this would kind of be the momentum line if you're playing the momentum stuff, would be that line. You'd like to see it kind of hop above and stay above. But then it also, now if you look at the earnings consensus average here, the forward, this is the next year's estimates, you can see over the last year a pretty big increase in the earnings estimates from 137 to 167, which the stock is up up 20%, which is, about what those earnings estimates are. But you like to see those going up in the right direction, and hopefully you can see them continue to going up. And as you can see, stock price has been going up, earnings estimate has been going up over a longer 3-year time frame. The other, positive trend both in the stock price and then also, and hopefully it sticks above the 200-day here, and then also in the earnings per share. But then if we move on to look at any news, filed a mixed shelf, they might raise some money, which, you don't love to see. We have a $30 price target here. Wells Fargo initiated Archrock, which you could probably find somebody writing about on Twitter or something. Press releases, a dual listing a couple months ago, second quarter results, so nothing too new there. Look at filings. So we just see this is going to be the mixed shelf. This is the two purchases we just saw. This is probably earnings. So then we'll look at the transcript, and this is where I think it starts to get a little interesting, because we take a look at the CEO here, talks about the results. So they raised their quarterly dividend by 11% compared to the prior quarter, and over 27% in the last year, and they still have very good dividend coverage. So they've been able to raise the dividend. They also accelerated share repurchase under our program buyback, given what we believe is a dislocation between stock performance and strength of the current business. So they increased that as well. And then he very clearly, the CEO here says, I want to be clear, based on what we are experiencing in the market today and both our overall activity and bookings, we expect to grow our business and our profits through the rest of 2025 and 2026 and beyond. And confidence, in short, we have confidence in what we're seeing in the market, confidence in our strategy and operations. So, and then he kind of explains why. Confidence in the market, we expect growing LNG exports and power generation to create significant demand pull for the new U.S. natural gas production and midstream infrastructure, including natural gas compression, which is what they do, is the natural gas compression. He then also says, we have confidence in our strategy and our people, which, not as interesting. But basically, they believe LNG demand is going up, exports to Mexico, power generation, and the emerging opportunity presented by the onshoring of AI data centers. So now you have a little bit of an AI tailwind play. We're going to need more power. These guys are kind of in the place for that. So you've got that sort of industry tailwind, I guess you would call it. So I think all of that, it at least gives you a story now for why the insider might be buying, which is really what you want to have. You want to have some reason that you can hopefully explain why that insider might be buying. In this company, you could go compare the multiples of this company versus some other ones. Go look at EV/EBITDA, which they're at 10x last 12 months, which is going to be a little higher than kind of the energy equipment industry that they're in. However, they do have higher margins. They've been growing pretty well, raising estimates, so all that. So they're probably not massively undervalued, even though they think they are, but just based on multiples, they're probably not massively undervalued. But you can build the story of momentum heading in the right direction, earnings heading in the right direction, and you have this story of the company is also kind of putting their money where their mouth is through increasing dividends, increasing buybacks, insider buying, and they believe that there's this tailwind in the industry. So all of that, I think, makes Archrock a very interesting insider purchase. Star Equity Holdings, we did see this guy's been buying and selling at the same time. He's kind of weird. Let's see if they tell us anything. This can tell us anything about what was going on here. It doesn't look like it. So it looks like just probably some open market purchases. He made that weird purchase, if you'll remember, from a few days ago, where he both bought and sold the stock at the same time with no real explanation. So kind of hard to know exactly what's going on there. Another interesting one is this Next Energy, which we sent out in the email actually kind of before market opened, before this stock popped, but now the stock is way up. Let's see what the stock actually opened up. So yeah, so actually the stock's actually up quite a bit since we, 15% since we would have shared it in the email. Obviously this video takes a little longer to get cranked out, but this is another interesting play in that we've seen some insider purchasing. You now have another story here, basically, right? Right is the answer. We had the CEO here buying. This was during a purchase agreement, which did kind of damper a little bit the interest in this purchase. Also, his previous purchasing was horrible, negative. His timing on his previous purchases has not been good, all up at the top here. So as far as just his insider trades being a signal, they haven't been very good. However, now we have a director joining him in buying the stock, and we have the stock is way up because of this reason here, which we'll actually go look. So this one's actually going in the opposite direction. So this is an interesting one because you now need your bet here, right? The story you're making is not like a momentum play. This is not heading in the right direction. This is a turnaround play, which it is already popped up, I don't know, quite a bit since August. In the last couple months, it's already up a lot of amounts in the last quarter. If we look down here at August, it was 128. We're now up at 210 or something like that, 210. So yeah, nearly whatever that amount's going to be, probably 210 over 128, 60%. So pretty killer returns recently, but we've got a little bit of an AI play again. They've secured a long-term lease on 1,600 acres in Nassau County near Jackson International Airport. Stock's down 50% of the last year, but the AI AI-driven energy innovation firm plans to develop a 200 megawatt smart microgrid on approximately 1,200 acres of the property while reserving the remaining 400 acres for potential hyperscale data center development. So now you have this AI story where obviously if they are able to sign some sort of deal, they have the optionality basically to release good news about upcoming potential hyperscale data center development. Any news regarding that is going to cause the stock to pop, and then obviously it provides just business potential. If they're able to monetize these quite well, then they're going to make a lot more money. So that is basically the story here, is that trending in the wrong direction, the stock price and the momentum of the company itself. But you could go read through the transcripts, which I don't actually remember if they talk at all about. Well, so I mean, you can see like revenue kind of grew a ton, but a little up and down recently. Profits kind of up and down, nothing too great. I mean, a pretty volatile business, though, now operating loss, $25 million in non-cash stock compensation. So the numbers aren't going to be super interesting here, but you could read through kind of these filings to get a sense from the executives how what the plan is going forward. But almost certainly the plan is going to have something to do with this increasing the amount of land that they own, developing these data centers and that kind of thing. Now it's just up to you to decide, like, hey, do I believe that this management team can kind of follow through on that? And then obviously now, in terms of just the news announcement, I would probably argue that the news has been baked in, obviously, with the stock already up 20% in the day. That news has been baked in, and now it's just whether or not they follow through on that news and actually turn it into something more long-term beneficial to the company, is the whole story there. So certainly an interesting insider purchase. Would have been more fun if we would have noticed it before, or this was even a good one because the insider purchases actually came before this filing went out. Unfortunately, this most recent one that really caught the attention happened on the same day as the news came out. So there wasn't really, I mean, he bought the stock a couple days ago, didn't get filed until the day the news came out, so there wasn't much time for us to do anything there. Moving on to anything else, not much. Hain is kind of an interesting one because they're going through a big old turnaround, which is another one you can go read the earnings. They're very early in their turnaround here, so it's a much longer term play. However, I would also caution that it's very possible that these purchases, because the stock is down so much, 70% in the last year, and the insiders there are required to own a certain amount of stock, this could just be insiders buying more stock because they have to own a certain dollar value of the stock. So it could be a little less interesting, but that is a turnaround play there. We can switch over now just to look at a few sales to see if anything interesting going on in selling land. CoreWeave, more insider selling post the IPO lockup. Magnetar's been selling just tons and tons of the stock since then. An unscheduled trade sale here at Nvidia Corp, which never want to bet against the lead player in kind of this huge AI revolution, or if you do want to bet, you're going to want to make sure you get the timing right, and that's going to be tough. But there has been a lot of selling, a lot of selling since June basically at the company, which if we look over a longer time frame, which I guess they did do quite a bit of selling back in Q2 of 2024, and it didn't really, I mean, the stock was flat-ish over the next year or so before taking off again. But the insiders are clearly starting to take some chips off the table here, but again, trying to time this when, Nvidia might slow down is going to be a brutal undertaking. But quite a bit of selling by a lot of different insiders there is interesting. We got AvePoint here, a bunch of selling here as well, but this is mostly due to they had dual listing on Singapore, and then if we click into any of these, this will tell you that the shares were pursuant to the secondary listing to provide liquidity in connection with the listing on the Singapore exchange. So probably not super interesting there. More CoreWeave selling. We've had this Susan Ocampo director, 10% owner person, has been selling quite a bit at Maycom here, but timing historically hasn't been good enough to even really look into it too much. Lilly selling the Lilly Endowment selling some Lilly, which they've been doing for a little while. Here's an interesting one. This is kind of one of those, I mean, with this much momentum, again, this is like going to be really hard to try to time this properly. It also looks like just historically his sales, as we can just see, his sales timing by the CEO here has not been very good at all either. So it is notable seeing an insider selling the stock, and he's selling quite a bit. $15 million of the stock is certainly nothing to sneeze at. We can look down here, and it looks like, though, it's a bunch of stock options being converted, which then you'd want to look at the date exercisable and the expiration date, which is, we gotta find 6 here. Vested installments beginning on July 6th. So they've been vested for at least a few months, because I would assume they're vesting every year on July 6th, and these are vesting every year on March 15th, and they don't expire for a while. So in that case, I think he's actually owned these for quite a bit of time, would be my hunch, and they don't expire for till at least 2027 or even longer for the other ones. So So this seems pretty discretionary in that it's not like he just gained them or that they're going to expire in the near future. But still, the converting stocks, converting options in selling that people tend to view a little less skeptically than the open market purchases. And his timing historically hasn't been great. So I haven't even looked into what the story might be there because those weren't particularly interesting to me. Let's see, 10b5-1 sales. We got a 10% owner selling some Lens Therapeutics here. Historically, looks like they're selling track record. Looks like they're just starting to get rid of some of the stock here as the stock goes up, but not the best track record there to really dive into or see much here. Here we've got one at Argon, which they had, it looks like time to purchase probably, well, maybe not that well back there, but these sales obviously haven't been timed very well. It is notable that now 2 sales at around the same price in the last couple of months. Could be pretty interesting, but it's just a director selling the stock. Pretty sizable sale. I guess we can see if there's any notes here. Looks like they sold out on 2 separate days, which is kind of interesting. But I don't know, that'd be one, again, another company I haven't really looked into too much. I don't think the insider trade, the history for this insider is not particularly notable, but a sizable $4 million trade could be something to look at. And I guess we could just go look real quick at AGX and just see, is there any news or anything? So, and this would be another thing for me. It's like kind of hard to, we now immediately, the momentum is in the right direction, both for the stock price and for the EPS, the earnings estimates here are trending very nicely. So, you need something that's going to force these things to turn around, or else the stock's just going to keep cruising in that direction. So you can look at some news here. It doesn't look like they raised their dividend too. This would be one where it's like, okay, I mean, I get you're like really digging to try to find a reason why this insider might be selling in a way that's actually going, a notable reason, like why, with a good reason, because they could just be selling because they need some cash for whatever. So there's no great story, at least right off the bat, that I could find there. Some more selling at MicroStrategy, or now Strategy, I guess, which has been, we highlighted this selling quite a bit back in this range. So stock's been down quite a bit, since then, relatively speaking. And I don't know if this sale itself, this insider doesn't have a very good track record of selling the stock, except for this bump up here. So I don't know how much I'd really look into just that insider's sale. If we look at MicroStrategy as a whole, we can see she's the only one selling. She or she is the only one selling, but there's been a couple buys as well. So I don't know how much there is really of note there. Anything else interesting here? I think there's one more maybe that we want to take a look at. Here's another AGX sale, actually, which, now you've got a couple people selling the stock, which does make it interesting. But even still, there's just a story. I just don't quite know what that story might be, but that would be what you want to find out here. Then we have the CEO, I think, at Credit Acceptance Corp. This one is kind of interesting, just looking at this guy's previous sales. Nailed the top on a couple of these, not very good, not very good. So he's kind of 50-50 in terms of timing the sales well or not. We can go look into here. So it looks like now the employee stock options, he is selling. They exercisable. So look, I mean, he's right in the middle of these. They became exercisable at the beginning of the year. They don't expire till the end of next year, but he decided to convert them and sell them. So again, why is he deciding to do that now is an interesting question that you'd have to go answer. We can see if we can find anything here. They extend a warehouse facility. Insider sold some shares. Looks like maybe somebody sold shares a few days ago too. Let's go see what else they are doing here. So it looks like chief sales officer sold a little stock a few days ago, or a week ago or so. Chief alignment officer a couple weeks ago. I think just historically looking at the insiders, I mean, this stock has been certainly not a stock that off the bat would scream something that I'd be interested in buying. I don't know though if there's enough here. The insider timing and their sales seems to kind of be all over the place. I don't know if there's a very strong story. Earnings is down a little bit, which could be kind of interesting. Earnings estimates, but I mean, they kind of all follow along. The stock's been very up and down, not very interesting. The earnings estimate's been up and down, not very interesting. So unless you could maybe try to dig through the filings or something and see some reason why the stock might be falling in the near future, maybe it'd be interesting, but just based on what we're seeing, I don't think it's super interesting. There was one more. All right, PX we'll end with here. P10 Inc., a company that we've highlighted before because they just all this selling as it starts to roll over. It's had an okay year, but if we look back at kind of insider group selling, you'll notice a bunch of selling here at the end of 2024, and the stock went way down there over the next 6 months. The stock went from $14 to $8 to $9 or something. So a massive decline there. You also see a tiny bit of group selling here right before the tariff fall off. You see some group selling here right before another, $12 to $9 fall off. See a bunch of selling here before it went down, a bunch of selling here before it went down. So they've done a really good job timing their sales before. And you can see this is Q4 was a massive amount of selling, but Q2 they sold, which would have been some of this selling here, and now they sold $4.5 million. It's been 4 different insiders, 8 different trades, including this executive here who we click into and who has also timed his sales fairly well, who sold 4 times here, but as with the other people, sold at the end of 2024, sold here in February. Pretty decent timing, sold back here, pretty good timing. So we have good timing. We have a bunch of executives selling the stock. All of that I think is in a good history overall from these insiders. And then we can go look here. What else do we have? P10 Inc. overview. We can see we've got earnings down while the stock has been flat to slightly up. I think there's a little bit of a dislocation there. Just, you'd have to go try to figure out why that dislocation might be. But, these don't really follow along with each other. It looks like the price is just flirting around the 200-day if we zoom in a little more here. So especially if this thing starts to creep under here, you've got a pretty good floor, at least for, momentum and technical people that they'd be using this 200-day to kind of see which direction the momentum's holding. And then we can go look to see any news comes out. Dual listing back in August. They rise after a Q2 beat. They do announce a share buyback, so that would be, obviously that's kind of a slightly bullish signal. Not all companies are very good at it, but that's not a bearish signal, I guess, that for sure. So that might go against the bearish narrative we're trying to put together here. That'd be a point in the other direction. Let's see what they filed this 8K for. They're just some financing stuff, not very interesting. If we look at transcripts here, it looks like they just gave a talk at the Barclays Summary, which I'm not really going to go over, but they basically are just laying out their long-term, what they're going for basically, which if you do read through this, I think, they have a long-term plan that they don't seem too worried about, which if we go into Q2 earnings calls, they have a long-term plan here. If we look at again, they kind of talk about their long-term strategy, which is the same basically between these two, but they did recently make this Qualitas Funds acquisition. I don't remember if any of these fell, but you could look through their metrics real quick to see. Looks like they're nothing super notable. Their share repurchases, they did step them up a little bit. So they stepped them down quite a bit, I guess, still since Q4 of last year. And if you remember, they did a bunch of selling in Q4. The insiders sold a bunch. So while the company was buying a ton of shares, insiders were selling a ton of shares and the stock went way down. So, maybe they're not the best with their share repurchase timing. But if we look down here, we can kind of find what the story might be in the question and answers. It's not going to give us the question and answer. Oh wait, question and answer, expense outlook. Can you clarify the expected step up in expenses in the back half of 2025, especially compensation and benefits? And basically that acquisition that they had, they say if you ignore the acquisition, the expenses are expected to be consistent. However, that acquisition has increased their expenses quite a bit, which if we remember one of these, they would have told us. I guess they're not telling us here. How do I get rid of the summary here? They do say somewhere else in here, basically, they have some, due to interest rates, they have some expenses, and then also because of that acquisition, they have expenses just related to paying out the employees at that company. So they mentioned over the back half of the year that they're going to have some more expenses. So to me, the story here, if you buy it, is basically long-term doesn't really seem to be an issue, but there could be some expected, they are expected, but there could be some higher expenses on the back half of this year. So maybe over the next quarter or two, the stock could struggle a little bit, which would line up with kind of this declining EPS consensus. And obviously, if the stock is starting to roll over, if it kind of gets below the momentum line, then you'd have some negative momentum, you have some negative EPS momentum, and you have some increasing cost concerns that for the next quarter or two could make this stock struggle a little bit. So I think that's probably the story that you would construct here of why these insiders might be selling and why in the near term this stock could perform poorly. So you can head over to CEOWatcher.com, find all the insider trades for yourself and look through them. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.